Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me early this morning to attend our program workshop. We're going to be meeting together this morning to talk about a series of master's classes called WD. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here and we'll get started. Up just to indicate that you can see the screen okay. Everyone's fine. We can see, yes. Yes. Okay, thanks so much. All right, so my name is Michelle. I'm going to facilitate our WD World Class Discourse program workshop this morning. There is a lot of content for me to cover and to go in with y'all. So please, at any time, if you have a question, if you have something you want clarified or for me to repeat anything, please feel free to just turn on the microphone and interject. You can also write any questions or comments in the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on that as well. But yes, we're taking the time to meet all together live so that those questions can be fielded and things that you want to know more about from the program I can actually address, right? Rather than just like watching a video workshop. So if you do have any questions, please stop me, okay? So World Class Discourse, this is the WD code for this series of master's classes. And this is an overview of all of the programs that are offered. So we have several 100 level master's WD classes, which are productivity and motivation, moral philosophy, social science, and behavioral science. Something to note is that 103 and 104 are kind of like a companion course. They often go together and run together. Okay, then 200 level, we have justice, mortality and the meaning of life, and hardcore history. And then finally, at the 300 level, we have our future in the universe. Okay, so for WD, all of these programs are unified by the notion of looking at kind of public and global discourse, themes that are prevalent in our world today, like justice, like our productivity, like philosophy, and taking these themes and then trying to apply those in real world situations, real world applications. So that's the thing that kind of links all of this together. And we're going to, look at all of them. So the first thing to keep in mind are the module checkpoints. These are checkpoints laid out by Cheongdam that your faculty manager, head instructor, or team manager would utilize in order to evaluate your ability to run the module. So I think it's always important to teach to the checkpoints and to just have an idea of how to keep yourself on track. So the first one is really straightforward. And it's just to see if you're able to confirm student understanding of lesson content, right? So are you effectively breaking down and digging into lesson content so that students establish their understanding? Okay. And the second checkpoint looks to see if you're able to have your students apply the skill-based lesson that happens usually in the first part of the class and take those skills and transfer them onto the explore or project-based activities, respectively. So I think especially this second checkpoint is really important to keep in mind. As you're prepping and when you're looking at your segment guides, you can take a look at the skills that are in your lesson and then really think about how you're going to integrate that into Explore or into the project. Okay. So let's take a look at the first module, WD 101, and we'll kind of go through some key aspects of this objective together. So in WD 101, the thing that we're emphasizing on is how to be productive in your daily life, right? So we're looking into habits that we keep and how we prioritize different activities. We're also having our students try to kind of take a self-help approach to things and look at why they agree or disagree with a certain life practice or habit. And ultimately, we want our students to plan out their goals and think about how they're going to create an action plan to achieve those goals. All right. So in 101, we use several different texts. The first one is called Getting Things Done for Teens. And then we have How to Be Miserable. This is a really fun text. Actually, my students quite enjoyed reading this one. And finally, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. Okay, so the books will match the lesson content and then also have a through line to the project output. So we have a bunch of different projects. There's a nice variety in this module. We do things like app design, we do writing projects, we do motivational speeches, essay writing, PPT presentations, vision boards. There's a bunch of different output in this module, and students tend to have a lot of fun with it. Okay, so this is a look at the schedule for the class. And so I want to note that the skills that you teach during an activity like Scout or Dive are what your manager will be looking to see if you apply when it comes time for Explore and Project. So what you've accomplished here on these pages, are you now mobilizing those skills through the Explore and Project activities? Okay, so that's how you would achieve the second checkpoint. All right, then let's talk about 102, which is the moral philosophy class. Okay, so for this class, one of the main objectives is to take a different perspective on life, on moral topics, okay? And see how, as a class, we can both personally and collectively relate to these things. And then see if there's any kind of practical application for these moral concepts, because I think often philosophy is something that is so abstract, right? And then how can we take those ideas and apply them in a more pragmatic way? All right. Then we use the book What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. So there's kind of like a theme of economy that runs through this novel. And I really enjoy the way that this book is set up, actually, because it presents students with several different scenarios in each chapter or in each like part of the book. For example, one of the scenarios is jumping the queue. Is it okay to pass somebody in the queue, right? Or fines versus fees. If the punishment for a crime is to pay a fine, is it really a crime? Or is it just a crime if you're poor? What about if you're rich? Is that a crime? And so the book helps us dig into these moral, ethical, philosophical concepts. The SMART textbook kind of matches that, and then we create some kind of project output that relates. Okay. So in this class, we have two different schedules that run. So you'll see here, there's one for even weeks, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. And then there's one for the odd weeks as well. So the only like real notable difference between even and odd weeks appears right here at the bottom, which is the presentation and idea collection component referred to as showcase presentation. So this is occurring in the even weeks. But if you check out on the odd weeks, we don't have that, right? They're focusing on a writing project instead. But in even weeks, we actually have dedicated time for presentations and for feedback. Okay, so something to keep in mind is to balance out the amount of group projects that you run and presentations that you have, and then the amount of individual projects like writing-based projects that you run. The way that the segment guide has structured it is that you will rotate every other week. You'll be doing group project, then individual writing project. However, I think that it's okay to adapt this to the needs of your learners and your students. That is to say that we should still try and prioritize some writing in the class. But if you're not going to run it on every single odd lesson, I think that's okay. Because I know sometimes it can be difficult when we have essentially like an hour of the class where it's kind of quiet and there's not a lot of talking happening and students are just sitting by themselves and writing. It's not always the best use of our group collaborative time in class. That being said, we do need writing projects to occur, so just keep that in mind, okay? All right. So on the theme of writing projects, let me show you something I've used in one of my classes before, just to kind of contextualize this. So the thing is, with master's students, they tend to be quite good at writing already. That's why they're in masters. Have any of y'all in the call read any kind of essays or writing from a master's student before? Has anyone had that experience, reading their writing? Okay, I see some hands. With someone in the with a hand in the air, if you feel free to speak out or put in the chat, what has been the quality of their writing? How are your students writing? Were you impressed? Were you underwhelmed?
I actually want to share, and that's just because my master's students, I feel like they stick out from the standard stock of master students. I only have two. I have two of them, and they're just completely exhausted every week. So frankly, I'm not all that impressed with their work. So I'm very excited for when my current Albatross Plus class moves up to master.
I have a follow-up question for you, Stephen. Have
Sure
you been
thing.
able to identify like what exactly is exhausting the students?
I think it's their schedule outside of CDI.
Mm-hmm.
To my understanding, they just have this gauntlet of other academies, schoolwork that's just completely draining them. Like when break time comes, and I admire them for keeping their heads up during class, because as soon as break time comes, they collapse, essentially.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you for answering that follow-up question. I think that's definitely true at the master's level. Kind of like the structure there and even the family planning there is that these students are being put through the academic ringer, for lack of a better word. That can definitely happen. And so I think that's why it's important to adjust. Like I said, if they are not responding well to individual writing for an hour on every odd week, I think as the teacher, the responsible choice to make is to adjust the output to suit the needs of the learners, right? So if that's going to exhaust them, and then because they're so exhausted, they can't create some kind of meaningful output, really, in the end, we're not achieving the objective. So let's find a different way to do so, okay? Nicole writes that her students write in an academic and structured way, but that they're not very creative. Okay, and so these are some things we want to address when we're teaching writing. So, for example, this is just like a workshop I gave. I think I did it in the week 3, one of the first weeks of the class, on how to write an essay, because even though my students know in masters how to write an essay, there are some details and things that I feel like they forget about. So we go through and look at how to identify the purpose of a prompt, right? How to break down the prompt, how to utilize the key verb. Are you comparing something? Are you evaluating? Are you being asked to explain or to reflect? Like how to start off. Then time that should go into structuring and planning. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. And then in your writing process, some tips that you can give using persuasive language, using like metaphor throughout the essay as well. And this is something I've utilized is the, I guess, analogy of the blind lady. So imagine you're guiding a slightly confused old blind lady to a place that she doesn't know exists, okay? This is how your essay should function, right? You are guiding the reader, and don't be afraid to point out things that you might feel are too obvious, right? So I think that this was a metaphor that helped my students to understand the degree to which they need to write in detail, right? Not just gloss over ideas and facts, but to really dig in and explain the purpose of their writing. And then I just gave them some overall feedback of common kind of like tropes or errors or things to improve on that I see in their writing. Yes, how to write their thesis, focusing on personal and societal examples, and answering the question of so what, right? So if the argument is that there's no justice these days because people are selfish, okay, so what? Why do we care that people are selfish? Why does that matter? Okay, so kind of encouraging them. This was a big question that I used throughout the module all the time, was asking students, so what? Why does that matter? Okay, so when you're prepping for writing, yeah, I just wanted to share that, yeah, students, even though they're in masters, will likely need some more kind of guidance and structure from you. All right, so let's jump back in. Where was I here? Yes, okay. Okay, so we went over just the difference between the even and odd schedules for this module, which now brings us, okay, to 103 and 104. So the objective of both of these classes is the same. And here, the objectives ask us to ensure that students are able to explore issues through new perspectives, okay, to be able to use persuasive speech and writing, and then to get exposure to fundamental and global issues. So these objectives are pretty broad. And so because of that, I feel like they are generally pretty easy to meet. But let's talk in a bit more detail about what that means. Okay, so for 103, there are two texts that the students will read, Freakonomics and The Tipping Point. Okay, and in the lesson content, we have some big themes that we look at. For example, in lesson 5, we're looking at nature versus nurture as it applies to parenting. Okay, then in another lesson, we're looking at how to get a sticky idea in the context of Sesame Street and Blue's Clues, and why certain things stick and others don't. Okay, and then we have a project output each week. For 104, the texts that you'll read are Sway and the Outliers. And the lesson content is going to function in a similar way, where we have ideas that might seem like a contrast, but we're going to find a through line and way that they relate. For example, Southern violence and Korean air. Okay, and then looking at how things come to have a reputation and what are similarities and differences among those reputations. Okay, so for these classes 103 and 104, we have a lot of close reading and analysis that happens in this class, right? Almost an hour, right? That's essentially the whole second hour that we are doing close reading and analysis. So in my experience, this is the area of the class where we would need the most modification or adjustment. If you've got those overwhelmed, half falling asleep master students who are being shuffled from one academy to the other, maybe 30 minutes into the close reading, their eyes and their heads might be drooping, right? So feel free to make some modifications to this activity. I think this is where I've put in the most modification. Okay, and then the last hour is the project. So in this set of classes, we have a final project. We preview that in week 1. So that's something to note, is that when you're prepping for your master's classes, it often feels different, at least for me, from my perspective, than prepping like a C1 or an A2. In those classes, I tend to just prep week by week, right? I just prep for the week I'm teaching. But for masters, I usually like to prep pretty far ahead. And what I'll do is when I'm starting in week 1, I will also first open up like week 12 and 13 smart textbooks and look ahead to what's happening at the end of the term, and then be sure that I know what's happening so that in the beginning weeks, I can set the tone and I have kind of like a procedure and routine that's being built into the class. Okay, so this class sets it up that way, right? Where in week 1, we're looking at a preview of the final project. And then from week 11, we're preparing the final essays, and the schedule continues to have them produce it in week 12 and present in week 13. All right. So those were the 100 level classes that we've spoken about. Let's now talk about some of the 200 level. The first being justice. Okay, I'm really curious. Has anyone taught this justice class who's in the call right now? Okay, so I also have not taught this class. This is one of the ones I haven't taught yet. And I'm curious about it because I'm familiar with Michael Sandel and his course on moral philosophy. It's been like in my YouTube recommended before. Okay, Maddie says she sort of taught it. So maybe I'll call on Maddie here a little bit in the presentation. All right, but yes, being familiar with Sandel's work, I feel that this material is pretty advanced, right? Sandel is a Harvard professor, and so his material is geared towards like a uni Harvard level, okay? And now we're taking that and we have adapted it for this Cheongdam course, okay? So yeah, the material is structured in a similar way to his lessons, and you can see his lessons on YouTube. And then the book that we're using, yeah, his book is based on the course. So just something to keep in mind is how to take these big ideas and translate them into a more like tangible, bite-size, digestible idea for your students, okay? So yeah, we have the book Justice for the first 7 weeks of the class, and then we have Mother Night, and then we wrap up with Justice again at the end. And so the chapters are based on different concepts in moral philosophy, like looking into Immanuel Kant's ideas or utilitarianism versus libertarianism, etc. So these are concepts that some students might know in masters, but other students will be hearing for the first time. I mean, to be honest, probably the first time that I heard of utilitarianism wasn't until the end of my high school career, probably for me. So the fact that some of our students who are potentially in elementary school, if not middle school, don't know about utilitarianism, right? That's going to be completely normal. And so that means that we need to do a good job of prepping the lesson in a way where they're going to understand, you know, these very advanced concepts. Okay, then the project output here is based on several different outputs. There's creative writing that happens, researching project that happens, several debates that happen throughout the term. The debates, I think, will be a lot of fun, especially for a class based on justice and morality. I think students should really enjoy that. And that output, I think, for me, really matches the theme of the class. Okay, so just to reiterate, again, one more time, the skills that you are teaching in something like a Scout and Dive component need to be transferable and directly applied to the Explore and Project components in order to achieve the checkpoint. Okay. Okay, so there's a different schedule for lessons 8 to 12, and that's because we're focusing on the reading Mother Night. And so there's more emphasis put onto the concepts and themes of that text, which do relate as well to the justice text. But just keep in mind in your segment guide, you kind of have a lesson breakdown for 1 to 7 when we're reading justice, and then a lesson breakdown for 8 to 12. And then this is just a look at the final lesson 13, in which we do our speeches and debates and final project output. Okay, so the program guide notes that the class is heavily centered and reliant on student discussion. So we really want to be encouraging students to share their ideas and engage with one another directly. And so I think that's why a debate type project is a really suitable, like natural companion to this kind of module, because the discussion points that we bring up in class center around things like issues and dilemmas that we experience with our own morality. And so I think debate is a great way to then like structure the discussion and the skill that's happening in class, and then pair it with a project. Okay. One thing I think that's just important to note here is always trying to personalize things so that students will better understand. Yes, because as I said, a lot of the themes are quite advanced. So when you're talking about like Immanuel Kant's ideas, if you can find any kind of way to personalize that and center it more so in the real world, that will always help your students. Okay, we move on now to WD 202, which is mortality and the meaning of life. All right, so in this objective, we are examining mortality from different perspectives, okay? And understanding how that impacts the way we move around, the way we interact, the way we live our lives. We're going to focus on personal opinion and discussion and writing, okay? Having students express their own point of view. And the output is largely based on creative projects and stories. All right, so there are several different texts that we'll use. We have the 5 people you meet in heaven, when breath becomes air, and what made Maddie run. Now, something I do want to note is that several of the themes and I guess content from these books can be like triggering and yeah, potentially very sensitive because the course is kind of centered around mortality and death, right? So there's mention of some, macabre and very like dark topics that happen in these books. And so I think that as the adults in the room, as the educators, we always want to try our best to make sure that the sensitive content, while we handle it, is handled, very gently and respectfully, and that we also know when to stop a discussion, when to pull back. I think that's a really important skill for this module, is knowing when to kind of pull back and put something to rest so as not to overextend a topic, because our students, again, are likely in middle school, and if not, in elementary school, right? We have at my school several master's students who are elementary level. So if they're in this class, again, I'm going to have to adjust and make sure I run the class accordingly to match their age and their cognitive level. All right. Okay, I don't need to repeat myself too many times. This is just to show, again, teach the skill, apply it in the project and explore. Okay. So lesson 4 has a different schedule because we will have short story presentations that happen in level 4. And so, or in lesson 4, sorry, and there's dedicated time built in for that. It's essentially almost all of the class time is for their presentations in week 4. Lesson 13, because it's the final project week, also has a lot of time carved in for final presentations, and that lesson schedule will look different as well. Okay, yes, so as I touched on, there's sensitive content that comes up in this class, especially when you're preparing like media and additional content or videos for the class. Please be aware of that. The other thing is that there's going to be a lot of different personal opinions and controversy that comes up when we start comparing our beliefs and our values around some of these topics. So just make sure, again, to be respectful, to be gentle, to know when to pull back. We have to have caution when we are teaching this class. Okay, any questions about this one specifically? All right. Okay. There are, again, term projects and then micro projects that happen throughout the module, and those are outlined in your segment guide as well. Yes, that's fine. Then let's talk about 203, which is the hardcore history class. So when it comes to breaking down these objectives, first, we want to have students understand a historical perspective through the lens of our modern civilization, and then see how they can apply any skills learned in class to real world issues. All right, so here we're taking concepts of things from from the past and see how they're still applicable to today's society. Okay. The final objective says to realize what comprises societies and civilizations and recognize their fragility in a global system. I think this is a really fun thing to dig into, and something that my students and I really enjoyed is to see how history kind of repeats itself and how our different global systems operate. So for WD, we have the end is always near. We're using this book for the term. We are also heavily relying on a series of podcast episodes. So there's a podcast that gets assigned for each class. The students will preview it for homework, and then you'll also listen to parts of it in the classroom. And through the podcasting, that will help you to relate to the book content and then also the smart textbook content. Okay. One thing I want to note is that the lesson content and the book and podcast themselves, they are all centered. They all take a really like Eurocentric approach to history. We've got Rome, the Cold War, all of that. So I will say in this class, when it came to my projects, this is where I definitely centralized things back into like Asia and to a Korean context, because Korean history is like so rich and so interesting. It's also something really relatable to the students, and something that they enjoyed learning about a lot more was Korean history. And so I injected a lot of that into the projects. So I modified to reflect their personal interests. And some of my students just had like a wealth of knowledge about Korean history too. So it was really cool to take skills they already have and then build on that through English output, rather than only teaching like kind of this European story of history. So just something to bear in mind. Okay, again, have your skills and then your project output at the end, and make sure there's transference between the two. Okay, so something to note is that, as I mentioned, the class is based around the Hardcore History podcasts. These are done by Dan Carlin. So students will listen to these podcasts from week 1 for homework, and then they're going to listen to other parts of the podcast when they come to class next time together with the teacher and take notes and discuss the content from the podcasts. I will say, in my experience, the first time I taught WD, I taught this class with a group of elementary level master's students, and several of them were new to program. So they had just come from Alba Plus or IBT classes and had just entered master's. And so the podcast, the book was fine for them. The podcast was above a lot of their levels, because Dan Carlin, the way he speaks, tends to circle around ideas and then come back to them and then verge off to another idea and then return. It's not exactly a linear approach to podcasting that he takes. And so something that I had to do to help my students and prepare for the lessons was to essentially prepare like podcast keynotes, in which I would write out a bunch of leading questions of things to listen for and a brief summary of what the podcast was talking about, so that the students could have that in front of them at home when they were listening to the podcast. Because I found when I didn't do that, when I just said, do your homework, listen to the podcast, they were not listening, or they were listening and not understanding any of it. And so that's just something to keep in mind, is you might need to prep and prepare like additional supplementary pieces to go along with some of the lesson content, because like I said, there can be like a huge range of diverse abilities in masters, in my experience, compared to any other level. So some of the masters kids have been there for 2 or 3 years, and they've done like every single master's class, and they're in middle school, 3rd grade, and they're in the same class with a elementary, like 5th or 6th grader who has just joined master's and hasn't done any of the other classes. And so there's going to be a discrepancy there. So make sure you prep with your student needs in mind. The projects for this module are really, really fun. There's a lot of podcasting projects, as well as like history presentations, final reports, and writing that the students do. And so I'll just show y'all an example of a project that I did in my class, just so we can get a good idea. Share my handout. Okay. So for this class final project, we created a historical podcast. In the handout, I went over the objectives for the project and how they'd be evaluated, and then gave them a prompt. So here, the prompt was that the world is ending and how far have we really come? So choose one current societal issue and then present the history of this problem. How did it start? How did it progress? Where are we currently on the problem? Does the issue look the same in all parts of the world or in all parts of history? So through the lens of history, break down the issue. So I selected some possible issues. Some of them we went over in class, and others I thought just might be interesting for the students. So in the actual class, we went over topics like feminism, we went over nuclear warfare, we went over democracy, and we also touched on wealth disparity. And then I also just added racism and immigration as potential other topics that the students might want to dig into. They then created their own podcast around these topics. The podcasts were 10 minutes. They used editing apps on their personal devices and the Cheongdam tabs in order to make the podcasts. For this project, I also said that they should have a bibliography with their sources because they needed to research for this project. And so in the WD class, I was teaching them how to create bibliographies. Now, this is not any kind of APA or MLA formatting. My students hadn't gotten there yet, but what I did show them was just the title of the article, the author, the date of publication, and then a link to the article that they found. This was the level of bibliography we were at in my class. Okay, and then finally, I included a final project schedule and some websites that they might want to use for this project. And in week 13, we actually combined with one of the other WD classes, and we had like a viewing party where we watched and listened to their podcasts all together and gave feedback. So that's just an example of how you can take the content that's in the tablet and the projects that are in the tab, and then, yeah, have fun with it. Modify them how you see fit. Okay. All right, then that's the end of the 200 level courses. We'll now talk about this 300 level course. So this one is called Our Future in the Universe. Now, this one, it's very exciting, I think, and also very challenging because one of the first objectives says, build a cosmic perspective, right? The ability to think holistically across international, global, domestic situations, okay? We're then going to kind of take a bit of a STEAM approach, right? Science, tech, engineering, arts, mathematics. Through STEAM, look at how this has helped us solve problems in the past and how it could be applicable today and in the future. So we have like the kind of time frame that we're working with across all different times, across the cosmos, essentially. Okay, we also want to start thinking theoretically and creatively on issues and topics. Then consider, analyze, and visualize who we are as a species and what is our role on Earth. Okay, and why is that significant to a more sustainable future? So this class, I kind of wish I was a Cheongdam student sometimes so I could take this class. I think this class is super exciting and interesting. I will say I also think this class is very advanced, as it should be, because it is a 300 level master's class. So the book that we are using for the class is 21st Lessons from the 21st Century, this Cosmos book, okay? I want to indicate just how advanced the class is if you see the pages that are assigned, right? Here we have a first set of 30 pages and the next set, right, of about like 15 pages. So students are reading quite a bit for this class. Lesson 6, we're covering, 60 pages. And the text itself is dense. It's highly theoretical, highly conceptual. So I think it's always important to take a practical approach, right? And always scale things to reflect the needs of your students. While this is what we aim to cover and what we hopefully can cover, if it's not hitting, if it's not reflecting with the students, we do, have the ability to kind of scale this and just focus on the most important parts. Okay. You might not be able to cover like all 100 pages. Okay. I'll leave this. That's fine. Okay. So we have different lesson schedules in 5, 9, and 13. These are weeks where we're spending a lot of time on project presentations, and that's actually happening in this class in the second hour. And the end of the first hour, we have 80 minutes for macro projects in lessons 5, 9, and 13. And then the other lesson schedule is here, 1 to 4, 6 to 8, and 10 to 12. We're running like a typical class where we open up with reflect, scout, and dive activities, where we go over skill theory and the lesson content. And then we get into the explore and the project components where students then materialize. Okay. All right, important to note, this is a challenging class for students, right? Yes, Cosmos, this novel, and the material in 21 lessons for the 21st century, they lean really heavily, like I said, on STEAM and kind of like academic science. It also often means that they're expecting that you have like pre-existing knowledge on these topics. So high-level master students should be able to understand some of the course content and be able to discuss it. However, this is going to really test your level of prep and your level of engagement with the book and the overall content. I think we really need to go out of our way in a challenging class like this to make sure that things can still be bite-sized and digestible and simple enough that students have a understanding in their second language. Because I will say, I had a master's student who got Cosmos in translation, like a Korean version of the text. And the student said that they were not able to understand some of the book in Korean either. So they weren't fully understanding concepts in Korean. That means in English, it could be even harder. And so I think it's really important to note that when you are teaching this class, you don't have to be just so grounded on the book at all times. You can also be preparing supplementary material and other course material, other resources that are going to help your students get the most out of this class. Okay, so the book is just going to be, I think, one piece, and then you can prep with additional pieces. I have a question in the chat. How old are the oldest students? This will be specific to each school. At my school, the oldest student I've taught was high school first grade in masters. So they were technically in in international age, like 9th grade, like first year of high school. Currently, my oldest master's student is middle school 3rd grade. So an American or Canadian 8th grader. But I think that will be different school by school. Does anyone have master's students who are older? Okay, maybe not. Maybe the oldest one. Yeah, like I said, I had a couple of first year high school students. Maddie says also oldest was 10th grade for me too. Yeah. The thing is with the high school students, they don't tend to stay at our academy for too long because once they're in high school, they have a whole other gamut of activities and a whole other schedule that they need to be getting done when they're in high school, and Cheongdam just might not be a piece of that anymore. So typically it's going to be elementary and middle school students that would take a course like this. But as I said, I think the schools really try to schedule, especially a 300 level class. I know at our school, the scheduling procedure is that students have to have completed all of the 100 and all, if not most, of the 200 in order to then take the 300. They also at our school have to have a certain IBT TOEFL score in order to be considered like a grandmaster, like a 300 level student. That's also going to be reflected by their TOEFL score. But I think each school might do this differently. Steven says his oldest is in the 9th grade. Yes. Okay. So these are some segment guide notes about 301, about how to teach. They say to rely on group and pair work as often as possible, to provide like prompts or discussion-based ideas around the book to students in small pairs and groups, and then give them a short amount of time to work together to answer the discussion question, and then come back together as a class and discuss the answers. When the material is advanced as this is, we shouldn't just pose a question and expect an answer back immediately. We want to give them time to prepare their answers. It is important to like challenge our students though, and challenge, encourage students to challenge their peers and push back on our ideas so we can develop critical and creative thinking though. Okay. So I know that was like a whole whack of information that was just thrown out at you on like 7 different modules, but essentially for, yes, world-class discourse, these are all of the programs that you might teach if you're a WD teacher. Let's now speak on some of the modifications to consider. The first one would be making a Google Drive. Okay, so this is something I do in all of my master's classes, is I run them through Google Drive. So as part of week 1 homework in my class, students have to create a Gmail. And then by week 2, if not week 1, I add everybody to the Google Drive. And then all of the master's teachers who we all teach that same module, we're all in the drive. And then we make like classroom folders and all of the classroom material gets uploaded there. The really great thing about this is that everything is centralized, and that there's also the Google Chat feature, which my students have been exploring, so that if they have questions for me after class, they can either Gmail, they can like email me, or they can use the Google Chat and just chat to me a question. That way we're in more frequent communication, and for like the 200 or 300 level modules, when there's a lot of like moving pieces and work that's happening, students can reach out to me at other times than just when they're at the academy. So we've talked a lot about lesson prepping based on your individual student needs. As master's instructors, sometimes we need to adjust for things like 내신 or like, school testing. We might also need to adjust, for a variety of reasons. Students are tired, students are new to the program. Keep that in mind. Always prep to your student needs. When it comes to project modification, as master's instructors, you are trusted by your schools to take the structure that's being provided to you and then to build on it and extend it in a way that you think will be best for your students in order to challenge them, and then also hopefully to encourage more peer-to-peer collaboration, because sometimes the modules are designed in a way that a lot of the work is individual, but we can make some adjustments perhaps to have more group work in the class so we can make better use of the class time. And always keep in mind to build towards final projects and term projects as you're prepping. So I think it's nice in week 1 to open up several lessons and take a look at what's happening across the scope. That way you aren't just prepping in isolation week by week. Okay, regarding the Google Drive, do master students bring laptops to the class? Is that encouraged, or do you just use the tablets CDI provides? So at my school and with my students, I have been doing both. My elementary students tend to only want to use the tablets and they don't have personal devices really. So we just run it through the tabs when I teach masters like 4 p.m. or with elementary students. However, my middle school students tend to have their own tech. They have their own iPads or laptops or other devices that they like to use. And so actually in Tuesday night's master's class, all my students had laptops or personal tablets that they brought to the class, and that they used those because we're in final projects right now. They've got all the cool editing software on their own tablets and their own computers that they want to use. And so rather than using KinMaster on the Cheongdam tab, they were using like iMovie and other things on their Apple tablets. So whatever is going to be best for your academy, I think ask your school. You can follow up on what the procedure is or what the rule is about bringing in your own tech. But at my school, we do a bit of both. Thanks for your question. Okay. Another thing, this is a slide that was kindly provided to me from another instructor that I thought I could show to y'all this morning, which is just some different resources that you can use to help you prep for the WD classes. We have Crash Course World History, which is a really great YouTube channel. I think some of y'all might be familiar with it already, but they've got great videos on different times in history. Khan Academy also runs like a great philosophy and like history based like talks and videos as well. This one here, they've got some really cool videos with great animations and that dig into different topics as well. And I will say, like, Wikipedia has its value in when we're just searching up a new topic. Like, for example, if I'm teaching like WD 301, the approach to the cosmos and my cosmic role and order, like maybe some of the things that come up in that cosmos book, I need to look up. And so, you know, use Wikipedia or other sources too, to prep for your lessons. Yeah. Okay. So this has brought me to the end of my prepared workshop. I would like to have some time now to field any other questions. We also have Ben in the call, and he's from the ESL content team. So if you do have like some more general or like content-based questions, I think Ben can field those as well. But yeah, let's open up the floor if anyone has questions, concerns, or any comments. Okay. All right, then. If not, it's no worries. I'm going to send a link right now in the chat. Should appear. It's a Google form to a survey regarding the workshop you've just attended. Yes, and if you can please fill out this survey, it would be greatly appreciated. They're going to ask you questions about your workshop experience overall, and there will likely be questions about myself as well. My name is Michelle, and how I was able to facilitate this workshop for everyone. So please feel free to, provide any feedback that you have. In addition, my email is in the chat here. So if you ever have any questions regarding the WD program, you can always follow up with me at a later time, and I'll do my best to help you with your prep or your classes or whatever questions you have. Maddie also just shared an excellent resource there. Yes. The Google Drive, I actually have that one as well, Maddie. This is like a great Google Drive. So I encourage you guys to click through to Maddie's link as well and just save that as a bookmark on your computers. Ben has also just provided his email in the chat, so you can, hit up Ben if you have any master's related content questions as well. Okay, well, I really appreciate everyone's time and attention this morning. I hope that you were able to learn more about the programs, the WD module overall, and that will be it for this morning. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.
No problem. Have an excellent day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.